Another episode of the Mattriarchy, and I am joined by a panel of comic experts tonight. With me is Dan Sacharow from the Mythoverse.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Dan deSosa from Tales of Bardic Fury.
Hello.
Brett McGowan, also of the Mythoverse.
Hi.
And over there is Matt Crotts of Kyrie fame. And tonight, we are going to discuss, and I'm super excited for this theme, we're going to be talking about mythology, folklore, and comics. And so before we dig in, let's go around the table and everybody kind of say what your project is and how that relates to the topic.
Okay, should I go first or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it, Dan.
I didn't want to just jump in, but yeah. So my work as part of the Mythoverse that would be relevant to this topic is Adobe Kroger, Dame Commander, and associated works. A number of side stories are written for it, and a novel. Largely, it's relevant in that what I did was I took the the often romanticized stories around the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne and his 12 peers, and modernized that into an urban fantasy setting.
Cool. Which is very cool. And actually, I think I want to get back to the Charlemagne and the peers a little bit later, but that's cool. So next, Dan deSosa, tell us about Oi. I know we've been on before to talk about it, but let's pretend we never have.
Yeah. It's a comic. I started out publishing as a comic and now I put it out as a web comic mainly. It's on Tapas and Webtoons. It's called Oi, Tales of Bardic Fury. It's about a bard in ancient Ireland gets sent to a town that never heard music before. It's set in around Iron Age 360 AD, so that's the final year of Julian the Apostate, the Roman emperor, who was a pretty interesting guy. But it hasn't really become relevant to the plot and probably never will because the comic's set in Ireland. And it's just kind of it's gotten pretty dark recently, but it started out as like a lighthearted fantasy slice of life thing just about villagers and bards. How is it relevant to this topic? It's about myth. I wanted to make it about bards because bards tell stories. I like how stories inspire real life events, or like myths inspire people to behave and do things that affect the real world. And this comic lets me draw that idea out. So thanks for having me on, and hello to everyone else.
So wait, hang on a second. Have we got Matt on two different screens, or is it we have both Matts?
You have both Matts.
Oh, okay. So often you can't come till second hour. So when Dan said you were going to be here, I was like, oh, he'll be here in an hour.
Yeah, I got my schedule changed around to be on here.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Well, since we're talking to you now, tell us, man. About
the newly mythics. Idea I had around it for paranormal investigator who solve cases. One of the challenges of writing, I found to be writing it, is to take some of those folklore weaknesses and make it serious.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think
go on.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, I just want to let you know, your connections was cutting out pretty bad. So I will fill in a couple of the details for those folks who might have missed it. One of the great things about Mythics is it takes a lot of your standard folklore, fairy tale stuff, and then and marries it with the like detective genre, kind of a Holmes, Watson kind of stuff, and matches that up really well with some more traditional folklore. And in this edition, this issue right here that I read earlier this week, and I got it in the post like last week, but I finally finished reading it this week. I think it was really cool because you have a Spriggan, a dirty fairy, and you do a great job of making him seem really threatening, and also using the folklore around it cleverly, and I really enjoyed that. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I thought it was really good stuff.
I'm gonna reset my connection because it's staying at red, so I'll be right back.
Okay, excellent. So while Matt is going, Brett, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your connection to the theme?
Do I really?
Well, what are you doing here, Brett?
I don't know. Okay.
Best show on the internet, people.
But anyway, mine is Changeling and Urban Fairy Tale, which is the young adult title in the Mythoverse. And how it relates is that it takes a lot of inspiration from Celtic folklore and mythology. As the title gives it away, it's primarily focused around changelings, which in the original folklore is a fairy baby that's swapped with a human one. My theory is that that was kind of their way to explain away birth defects, like say physical deformities or mental retardation. You know, those sorts of things.
And I think you're actually there's a lot of truth in that. I think also, if you go back to looking at rational aspects of the folklore, I think it also is a way of looking at postpartum depression, where a lot of women have a really struggle with their first kid and trying to make that all make sense. And I think that's probably a way of explaining that as well. But I think it's really one of the things that's really neat about what you've done with the first issue of Changeling, and I'm excited to read the next one, where it goes with it, is the idea of belonging, and where Maeve discovers that she doesn't really belong. And I think that's a big theme in young adult literature as a whole, but in all fiction, there's that idea of it, even going back to in the Mabinogion, the tale of oh my goodness, I forgot the night. Drat. I was going to sound really smart when you're trying to remember something I read several years ago, and I can't remember the character it is. Moving on.
Oh no.
Matt Crotts. We're here. First talking mythology, folklore, and comics.
By having a video. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
I
I'm
just
not
jumped
sure.
in. I just figured
You're slower, but
we're going to have a green room chat. Wow, am I that far behind? Am I like 10 seconds? Oh no.
Yes.
Oh, this is not going to work. Let me just. Okay, hopefully this is better. Maybe I just need to not do video.
Okay.
Let's see if I can.
It could be. I mean,
catch this.
yeah. Well, your signal looks fine on my end, but what do I know? So anyway, Matt,
Well,
talk to us about Kyrie.
Yeah. So Kyrie is an epic supernatural adventure set in 3rd century, or was 3rd century North Africa, and I'm increasingly expanding that to cover a lot of different cultures in that period and across time, like an excuse for me to play around with history and kind of what if scenarios, between about how things happen, what they look like, and also kind of maybe surprise, I guess, with worldviews that and experiences and our postmodern sensibilities. That's pretty much what I do.
And one of the things that Kyrie that's really fun too you've talked about it having a kindred spirit with Indiana Jones, but in terms of it being an adventure story and kind of a thing. But one of the other things it has in common with it is the idea that real history runs parallel with the fantastic. And not to give anything away, but there are fantastical stories, these mythic stories about Alexander the Great that work its way through Kyrie in a similar way to the way those fantastic stories, those legendary stories about Charlemagne work their way through Adobe Kroger. And so that's one of the things that I think is an interesting parallel structure, the way you guys are kind of playing that out there. The idea that the fiction stories that we have are that there's more truth to them than we might realize, at least how it plays up in that, which is a theme that I've liked to play with some in our Forces of Good and Evil stories a little bit. It hasn't come out a lot yet, but the idea that that the legends of the past are real today is I think is just so much fun. Which brings up the question of, since we all have told stories with that kind of a take to it, what was your motivation for kind of playing those ideas out, taking those fantastical, even fantasy elements, and putting them into a more real-world setting?
Well, before we go too much farther, I think I isolated the situation. It's Mr. BM in the bottom left.
You gotta put on
microphones.
microphone.
Now would be a good time to use them. And if you don't have headphones, you might want to mute your mic when you're not talking, because I think that it's causing the mic keeps trying to switch back to you because of background noise. Sorry, I was trying to help you out.
Also, Brian Ball is in the chat, which is certain to be a riotous time.
I mean,
Okay,
oh my God,
so
Brian.
Was that question addressed to the panel as a whole?
The whole panel, absolutely. I was just going to say, I was going to ask with all of that if I cut out too much and I need to go over it again.
No. I believe I got it. And if anyone else wants to go first, please do. If not, then I will be happy to.
All right, I'll go first. I guess I was inspired by, the music industry and just how also pretty much people today and stuff today is pretty much just like how it was back then, like thousands of years ago. It's just the technology's different. So I guess I wanted to tell a story with just relatable characters from thousands of years ago that could show people reading it that like, oh, they weren't just like backwards troglodytes back then. They were like people just like me, just as smart as me. They were just as dumb as me sometimes. They felt the same way. Because so many times it used to be when I was a kid, like you read history books and teachers taught it that like people in the Middle Ages were so backwards and they were just so stupid and they didn't know anything. But I think that's pretty unfair to them. I think like ancient people were a lot smarter than anyone gives them credit for, or at least smarter than what mainstream history gives them credit for.
See, I actually 100% agree with that. We had people navigate the globe with sextants, right? They built Stonehenge somehow. They the pyramids line up with the compass points. Like there's all of these things that we would have trouble building today, with our ridiculous technology that are still standing.
Or like Pacific people from 2,000 years ago in the Pacific Ocean could do open water sailing with just the stars for thousands of miles. It's crazy.
Well, and I mean, they have still, speaking in Ireland, they still have plank roads that they found that are under some of the peat bogs that are still in condition. They've dug them out, and you can still travel on them after 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And part of that's the preservation of peat, but
the highways in the UK, I forgot what they're called, but the main highways are the same Roman highways. It's the same path. They just repaved it over and over, but they're using the same route. So I thought also what would be interesting is like nowadays you have music and it's a lot easier for people to learn it. People have more free time and you get easier access to instruments. But back then, like there was no headphones and records. So like the people who could play music had a lot of power. So I thought it would be cool to have my comic just about them.
Well, and I think too, one of the things that blows my mind about learning to play, I play guitar and I play mandolin a little bit and stuff. And I'm not necessarily great, but I still do. But the thing that blows my mind about learning these different instruments is they're all fretted, right? Stringed instruments. And I've know some other musicians that play fretless, like Middle Eastern, like ouds and fretless mandolins and stuff. And I mean, like those guys are crazy good, and I can't even like wrap my head around playing a fretless instrument, right?
You just have to know where it is by memory. It's so hard. It's the same with like trombone.
It's 100% muscle memory, and those guys are amazing. Yeah. But that's how like every musician was, 300 years ago. So
yeah. And also they had to be good. Like if you were a scrub, the audience wouldn't be down for it. So it's not only did you have to have like no teacher and hardly any free time to practice, but if you were bad, you'd get like no time.
Wow, we've
sorry, did you just call really colorful. No,
I'm sorry, Matt.
We're still 10 seconds behind. Oh my goodness!
I was going to say I did. I was going to say I didn't understand what you'd said.
No, that's
probably
opposite of what's
as you're talking. I'm probably talking over you right now. Is probably what's happening.
We're good.
I'm gonna leave. And I'm gonna come right back.
Okay, that seems to be a popular choice.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Yeah, I tell you what. Sometimes that's just what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, Dan, what was your decision to try to take these, especially in terms of the urban fantasy setting, but taking these early Renaissance legends and adapting them into the modern world?
Certainly. Well, from 50,000 feet, what I've discovered over the course of the last 10, 15 years, and it's not a new phenomenon, but it's just become much more pronounced in recent years, is that whereas the stories that have endured for centuries, that their authors are long dead, but we still read them, like Shakespeare and things like that, to use a simple example, they were all centered in universal truths that were timeless, and virtues and beauty that endured over the centuries. It's because they were centered in the pursuit of truth and virtue, whereas more recently, I feel anyway, and I think it's been borne out, is that modern stories are more about the pursuit of like agitprop and power, that kind of thing. Stories have lost the universal in a lot of ways in favor of the material or political or sociologically relevant in current year. And one thing that I was hoping to accomplish, however, the degree to which I succeed is obviously up for debate. But what I have always aimed to do is to express those timeless virtues and truths and beautiful things with recognizable symbols and archetypes that everyone can immediately connect with, and add the extra, I guess you could call it, rhetorical layer of modern trappings on top of it to make it slightly more accessible without really distorting or deconstructing or necessarily satirizing the stories that I'm telling. In the case of Adobe Kroger, what I wanted to do was to take the archetype of the holy, avenging, righteous warrior and just place it, in an unlikely setting, but not necessarily to like I say, to deconstruct it or to satirize it, but just to open the door to these timeless tales in a way that a modern reader will probably be able to understand and appreciate more readily than reading like the Song of Roland out of the 1912 Collier Junior Classics,
right?
Example, where the language might be a bit less accessible.
I would like to think one thing about it too is I think you do a good job of taking those thematic ideas and putting them into a context that doesn't feel like super foreign. And I don't think it's just a language issue, but I think it has to do with the fact that Adobe herself is such a flawed vessel, right?
Oh yes, very much so.
So she understands that there is a greater truth, but she's not attaining, right? And I think that's also makes it really relatable because it echoes something beyond the story itself.
Precisely. My goal with making her so terribly flawed was that, as people, we're all fallen. We're not perfect, and we're in this world not to attain perfection, but to prepare ourselves for, a higher perfection later. And she is very fallen, not necessarily through any fault of her own. She's had, a vicious upbringing and all of that. But like you said, she is aware of these greater truths. Even if she isn't quite yet prepared to articulate it or to fully accept it. But over the course of her story, in the first novel, she does go through something of a spiritual journey. She doesn't quite get where she will be at the end of her story, but she is inching ever closer to the attainment of that ultimate truth, which she will eventually find.
Well, and I think one of the things that also, especially, it doesn't necessarily come out in the comic yet, but I did listen to the audiobook. And for those of you who are out there, it's available on Audible. You should get it. It's really great because she is really aware of her faults too.
Right.
It's not just somebody that like, I'm good enough, darn it. And that it's so much a part of like our modern, milieu, for lack of a better way of saying it. That or a less pretentious way of saying it.
Right.
But yeah, that's one of the things that I think is that she's aware of her need for something greater, and I think that's cool.
Precisely. And another reason why I've given her this journey is kind of a personification of what I described at the beginning of my answer, where I feel that stories don't pursue that truth anymore. I feel like they're more about deconstruction. They're more about control, or saying you should think this way. And, this is like those old ways of thinking were problematic because they were written by the wrong kind of people. They're presented through, political or sociological lenses instead of through the artistic lenses. And Adobe herself kind of represents that journey in my mind, where she's trying to rediscover those beautiful truths that are missing.
And one of the things I also wanted to point out too about the nature of art in our current era is we seem to have this idea that art is about expression, whereas in our pre-modern time, art was about art and story were about seeking something beyond, about portraying something greater, and not just in terms of. Sorry, the chat's cracking me up tonight. Which I'm glad you're enjoying it. But it's about seeking something bigger and beyond. And I think that's something that's what mythology is for. And I'm of the opinion that like folk stories and fairy tales are like step one of mythology, right? They're the
Yes.
They're the beginnings of this greater idea, these greater stories that help us to explain the cosmic questions. And And that's what mythology is for. So I think the fact that so many stories they're about the author's idea, or about their this I don't want to seem dismissive, but sometimes they're poorly masqueraded autobiography, and that reflects a person's experiences rather than talking about why they're there. Ooh, hey, it's art.
Yeah, try to have a background for when they're
Nice.
talking.
Yeah, I dig it, man. I dig it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I just want to say real quick, I couldn't agree more with how you just described the purpose of art and mythology in general. I usually think of it as like it's someone said, I can't think of who said this, so this is not me, but I'm quoting someone that I can't remember. It's the lie that tells us the truth. That's what stories are. And it's a way to make important truths stick in our minds, because like philosophy is awesome. Like obviously I love philosophy. I'm something of a mediocre amateur philosopher, but philosophy is very difficult. It's very rigorous, and it's not that sexy. It's dry and it's dogmatic, and it can be very hard to like lecture to people saying you should do this. It's much easier to tell them an engaging story with a moral, and they'll probably get it much easier. It's why I like to read stories to my kids that have morals. Like Peter and the Wolf is a simple example. Like don't lie, that kind of stuff. And it's a lot easier to drive that message home through a story like Peter and the Wolf than it is to just say lying is bad because of this. It's much easier to make that important truth stick in their head that way.
Yes, and I do think that's true that we do. And Nebel in the chat, speaking this point, says people think in stories, and that's exactly true. Anytime we try to express our ideas to somebody else, how often, if not most often, isn't it like, so the other day I was in the shower and I was thinking, and we tell the story of how we came to the idea that we're trying to express.
Yes. I mean, Plato was so effective because he presented his ideas in that form.
His next thought was not as profound. So Brett, what was your motivation for taking these ideas about legends and folklore and making stories about them?
To be honest, it's from a bunch of different places. So the idea for Maeve came from a character concept from an abandoned story idea I had for a comic years ago. And in case anyone's wondering, that it was about the character was very different from the Maeve everyone came to know. About the only thing the two really shared in common was the name. It just ended up getting tweaked, and then it also sort of came from my own life experiences. So I guess mine is the poorly disguised autobiography. But yeah.
I wouldn't say poorly disguised. I would never have imagined you as a 16-year-old girl. So
I thought that would get a laugh out of everybody. I'm disappointed.
Well, I'm laughing, so that's worth it.
Yeah, but yeah,
It was a slow burn.
that was kind of like my own life experiences, because I don't know how often I tell people about this, but I did not just grow up in a Christian household. I grew up a pastor's kid. Somehow I dodged the stereotype of either being super devout or super rebellious. So,
well, I think that's something that I don't know. Stereotypes exist for a reason, but there's always exceptions to the rule. But,
yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, that was just. It was just kind of. It's just kind of me drawing upon things I was into when I was in high school, and things I kind of experienced. And like I said, it's not okay. I mean it when I said the poorly disguised autobiography line was a joke, because there's no way Maeve's life is a one-to-one adaptation of mine. It would, because to be honest, my life story is not that interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's definitely true. I think we all draw from I think obviously artists draw from their experiences. If anybody's out there has read through Forces of Good and Evil, it's about, kids in public school. And I spent exactly 1 year in public school. So I don't directly relate to all of that, but I had friends that went through that slog.
Yeah, it's kind of more like I kind of use my own experiences sort of more to just inform the narrative. But the biggest reason why I stuck with Maeve being female was just because I wanted to. It was easier to resist the temptation to insert myself into her because I wanted her to feel like her own person. So like this has to feel like her story,
Right?
Otherwise, I might as well just tell people my life story, which, like I said, it's not that exciting.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good to know that your life is not the exciting part of it. But man, I think and I think that this actually gets to something that I think about hero literature in general, right? I think that that hero literature is a way of coding, a way of teaching us how to be grown-ups, right? Because I think that everything in you're fighting the dragons. Well, that's getting up and working the harvest or going to your job. You're saving the damsel. That's helping your wife change the light bulbs. Really, I think that there's the heroism of the mundane, is what I call it, because life is really hard, and it shouldn't be as hard as it is because it's just everybody's got to do it. But man, it takes a real force of will to stand up there and not.
I don't know that I would say life is hard. I would say it can suck a lot of the time, but hard. I've had hard times of my own, but overall, I wouldn't say my life has been that difficult. That's just speaking for myself, though.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So I disagree, but I can't tell you what you lived.
But yeah, like I said, I think we can both at least agree that it can suck for the most part. It can suck.
Oh yeah. Well, so last week I don't remember if I talked about it or not. I had a plumbing catastrophe that took up 2 days of my life, and I had to try to figure out where all my work came from.
I had to get the tires changed. I had to get the front tires on my van changed last week.
So, yeah. I think that's anyway, moving on. I'm just saying that we do go through things that we have to fight through. So,
yeah.
But anyhow, Matt Trinh. And I'll get to you, Matt Crotts. Don't be impatient. Matt.
Hey, I hear the name Matt. I've only got like class.
I don't even know what just
I figured
happened.
you weren't talking to me.
Yeah. Anyway, Matt Trinh, what was your motivation? And of course, this is not your one story, right? You've done. Oh, I'm just going to mute him while he figures out his microphone. Mythics is one of several stories that you've worked on, that you've talked about. What was it that drove? What was it that drove you to tell this story? Are you with us, Matt? I don't know.
Matt, where you
Well,
at?
that's awkward.
Oh no! Don't start referencing that again. Yeah, Matt hates it when I reference that stream.
Is Matt where you at his stream?
Well, it was used in a stream that I often make fun of Matt with.
I didn't know that was referencing anything, so my bad.
No, it probably isn't, but they were probably referencing it when they used it.
Well,
I can't
hopefully-
hear.
Hopefully, Matt takes no offense.
Well, I guess Matt Crotts, can you hear me okay? Because I'm not hearing. Does anybody else hear Matt Trinh? Because I have not heard him, and his signal is really weak.
No, I can't hear him. Is he in the room? I can't.
Oh, he said he thinks his connection died.
Okay.
So, well, Matt, I'm going to kick you,
Very, very
and if you can come back, feel free. Okay.
Mets.
Pardon me for a moment. I have to clear my throat. That's better. So there you go. Great show, great content, great technology. It's the best. I think it was a mistake to do a show the day after the inauguration. I think the internet's just so full of people with their opinions that it's clogging all the pipes. I have no idea. So, Matt Crotts.
Where are you restreaming to? What? Because I think streaming, normally you have a better shot of it, but maybe it's this.
Yeah,
this,
that's possible. I'm actually
restream thing.
well. Yes, Restream is a platform. Is just its own platform, but I may have to stop using it because it's not. Well, I mean, anyway, it doesn't matter right now. I can't do anything about it at the moment. You can gripe at me when we're off air. You just have to power through right now. So, Matt Crotts,
You know me.
your story, of course, the sword and the sandal, the thing. What was your motivation for taking these mythic elements and incorporating them into your ancient Roman adventure story?
Well, so I guess my attraction to history and mythology, I think is a bit different, at least on the surface. I think a different approach than some of you guys. Adobe Kroger guy, I forgot your name, but I like the way you were describing what you're doing. But I guess the way I'm going about it is I'm saying there's a lot of cultures that we think we understand very well, like ancient Greece and Rome. And the more you dig deep, in order to get back to something that looks like humanity that you recognize when you look in the mirror, I think you have to spend a lot of time getting to understand some really, frankly, foreign and alien assumptions that they had about their world. And you kind of have to struggle through those sort of things and reassess, what is really what you take for granted versus what you would find unnatural or unusual, and then those differences, similarities, and then you kind of can walk back to something that is fundamentally human and universal and something that we can all relate to. But it is a challenge. Yeah, I don't know. So I really like that sort of thing. So I like taking culture that surprise and weird me out, and try to figure out to play with things that they took for granted that we might also take for granted, and then things that they took for granted that we find abhorrent, and then just kind of weave back and forth through those without apology or explanation, to kind of, I don't know, maybe just to wake me up as a person in a culture that I don't fully understand or fully jive with all the time. It helps me kind of reassess where I'm at. So I don't know. I tend to, I don't know if you may have used this channel before, but I tend to just wait until I get tired of myself. So.
But that actually, I have a follow-up question for you. So give us an example of a kind of thing that you're thinking about, like a cultural aspect from somewhere that doesn't match an assumption that we have in the modern West.
like um, the deserve to be ruled by the strong is a that was a Western and Eastern assumption.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
Golden Kamui.
that was built into of Greco-Roman civilization uh, until until Christianity, and so but we look back through the Iliad and the which is perfect view, honestly, because these are living stories that everyone gets to reinterpret. In my view, we kind of we don't just Western, like they're Western stories, but they're Western stories that are deeply they have a very different view of non-consensual sex. They have a very different view of and it's not even a modern traditional view of what marriage is and what the women's role in the family is. Uh, Almost everything we think doesn't go farther back than 100 years. A lot of times,
Yeah.
In my
well, and I think that's actually a really an interesting point. Yeah, I think that's actually a really, especially the concept of marriage, is something that I hadn't really stopped to think about it in those terms. But I was watching a potentially contentious character, but Dennis Prager was doing a discussion video about the 10 Commandments, and he was talking about adultery and how he had previously just assumed that the idea of adultery was just a human idea, and we had different ideas of what marriage might be, but that this is something that just seems obvious. We started looking through old history books and old stories, and realized that in the ancient world, in the non-biblical world, one of the founding ideas was that, or foundational ideas that was very accepted in the classical world was that boys are for pleasure, women are for children. And the idea that that there's the whole difference in purpose behind sexual gratification, specifically related to functionality, which is terrifying to me, but it also makes perfect sense when you look at everything. that would be a thing.
And that's Western foundations at its finest, because that's how the Greeks invented Western civilization. They're the first person to come up with the Occidental Oriental paradigm, and they built their civilization on boys for pleasure. So anyway,
yeah, well, and
this is just an example of me trying to screw with people by showing how weird things are. So.
Well, and if you look at, and like, if you even look at like Oscar Wilde's whole clique of people in Victorian society, like that was a talking point, that they were like, no, we can't possibly be immoral because this is the foundation of Greek society. So don't tell me what I can't do. So me, coming from a very traditional Christian background, I'm reading about this and I'm just like, oh my God. Terrifying. Terrifying. It's call me weak, but it's just shocking.
The chat. I might be triggering every other panelist here, but the chat's having fun, so
yeah,
so so anyhow, but I know one of the other aspects too, this idea that of that from your discussion of paradigms, the idea that the strong should rule over the weak. That's the core of the not to get too far into this, guys, but that's the core of the argument going on in politics right now, right? Is whether or not the strong should rule over the weak. Because one side of the basis says, oh, the weak can't take care of themselves, so they need to be ruled by the strong. And the other side says, don't you dare call me weak. I'll rule myself. And it's the idea of state governance or person or individual governance. That's the argument that's still going on in our society today. But the difference is that the strong that want to rule the weak try to change the way they phrase it so that, you know, we're doing it for the people that can't take care of themselves. All those little minorities out there. We'll take care of them. So that's one note. Not to derail everything, but these ideas about mythology, right? That they are stories that tell the way we think the world is, like these big pictures about how we think things ought to be. And that comes back to, you know, my own personal ideas about hero literature is about teaching everybody to be heroes, right? But not all hero literature fits into that category, and not all hero literature allows for that. Certainly. And that's one thing that I think is really interesting in looking at some of the differences between like Celtic hero literature and British Isles hero literature and hero literature from other parts in Europe. And one of the big paradigm differences is that in Greek and Roman stories, a lot of them, the hero wins and is favored by the gods. And that's how he can defeat the monsters or whatever it is. But a lot of the Celtic legends, the Arthurian tales and the stories of the Fianna, they are favored by the gods because they've won. And they've won through the power of their might. They've won through their strength of arms. They've won through the honor of themselves. They've won through their personal craftiness. And so they've demonstrated that they're worthy, and then the gods bestow favor upon them after that. And while that's it's a very different idea, so the idea that a person can become worthy and can govern themselves to the point where where the divine almost necessarily favors them. And that's just a different paradigm that is still part of that different mythic structure that makes up the storytelling of a society.
See, that's hopefully you're not talking 10 seconds. When you hear this is the sort of interesting because on one very real, very measurable level, culture different in these paradigms that you're talking about they really are very, very real different worldviews. But then beneath that, as you get them, just as you're able to describe multiple cultures and their world in a very comprehensible way that we can all kind of nod our heads to and at least say, oh, beneath that layer comes that universal human relatability. But you don't get straight down to there from just reading these stories. You have to first, you have to travel through the dark forest of an alien world. You have to go through that first, and then you get to Grandma's house. But first, you have to survive the wolf, I guess, or I don't know. You guys know mythology better than I do, but
Greek ones are kind of just all about.
That's kind of how I'm viewing it.
Like. Everything's fated and destined, and you can't escape it. And then Irish.
Okay. deSosa, are you? Is that you? Because I can't hear you.
Oh, maybe the mic's dead now.
It's a good mic.
Your tone sounded really insightful, and I'm sad.
Well, oh well.
Yeah, you're saying good stuff.
Here, I'm going to put headphones on and see if that makes a difference. Hang on.
No, it's probably my mic's just too quiet.
I'll fill him in 10 seconds when he's back with headphones.
I don't have my headphones. They're upstairs.
It's all right.
Maybe
he was saying
I'll just have to catch the
that
replay.
A lot of Greek mythology is about fate and destiny and your doom kind of being sealed by the gods beforehand. And he was just highlighting the distinct, the very real difference in Celtic mythology, where it's more about your, I guess, your free action that secures your destiny one way or another. And those are very different, and yet they're both very human, and we can both relate to them. So.
Yeah, and the thing about it too, I mean, I think, and maybe Dan Sacharow is a better person to answer this question, but from a philosophical perspective, I don't think those things are. I think they're opposed, but I think they're both true, right? I think that there are certain things we can't control all of our life, right? But we can control our life, and I don't think that those things are really at odds in a way that we want them to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you absolutely have control over your own choices, but I believe it was Marcus Aurelius who emphasized that you should absolutely focus on what you are able to influence and not trouble yourself with things that are outside your influence.
Yeah, the Greek heroes didn't. Can you hear me now or not really?
It's better.
Okay, I'm just talking really close to the microphone, but I was just reading like an original version of Hercules, a comic of it, and it's every single time he tries to like do something for himself and live happy and be like, I'm gonna live my life, not do what the gods want. I just want to be a farmer with this girl. Then the gods like strike him and he goes into a rage and they force him to kill his wife and family. That happens to him like 3 times. Or he's with his best friend hanging out and he's like, I don't really want to fight anymore. He's like, yeah, let's have a good life, Hercules. And then, like, Hera strikes him, and she's like, no, you will fulfill your destiny. You will be a great god. So it's kind of like every single time he tries to fight it, he gets owned. And then at the end, when he gets, I forgot what the poison shirt is called. That's like when he just kind of accepts his fate instead of, like, fighting on through it. And he's like, this is time. This is my fate. And he's like the hero who we hold up as like the greatest Greek dude. Achilles is kind of the same. Like he just wanted to die, right? He knew it was gonna happen, and it happened.
Yeah, in a parallel story, that's sort of from the Celtic perspective too, the story of Cuchulainn, right? Who was grandson of Hugh the Longhand, and was was favored by the gods and all that kind of stuff, and had was trained by the basically elf women, became this mighty warrior, but still, and the epitome of anything that an Irish warrior should be, but still was victim to his own geasa, was able to be tricked into violating his own divine order, right? And one of the things about Celtic legend is the idea most of the heroes had geasa, things that they couldn't do, things that would break their contracts with the gods or violate their own nature, and every single one of them, that's the destruction, whether it's Finn McCool, whether it was the I'm forgetting names at the minute, Cuchulainn, whatever it is, that's no matter how ideal they can be, there's always this crippling that ends up taking them out, and it's not necessarily fate, it's just frailty, right? With that, in those cases, and I think that's side note. I've talked about this briefly. I actually think that I don't think it was intentional, but the Die Hard films, I think, are the perfect example of the mythic Celtic hero, the John McClane. And every movie, and everybody would say they get more and more unrealistic as he goes. He's capable of impossible things. Well, yes, that's because through his own grit and his own character, he's being favored by the gods.
That would explain why he could throw planes at people.
Absolutely. And be progressively older and still be able to do it. And I don't think anyone planned it out that way, but it matches the arc of a Celtic hero perfectly. And the way to pan it out is if in 6, in the final one, if he finally reunites with Holly, but that leads to his death, it'll be the perfect Celtic hero arc. So that'll be so that's what I'm hoping for.
Hadn't even thought of that. And his name is McLean, so
It is McLean. He's an Irish cop from New York, so it's only fitting.
yes.
So, why do you think, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but why do you think that these mythic concepts, these legendary concepts, fit so well into fiction? Why are we so drawn to them? Because even if you look at superhero stories, even if you look at the Hunger Games, all that kind of stuff, they tie. Sorry, the chat's cracking me up again. Why do you think that there is such an appeal to that?
Well, yeah, like all those heroes are basically superheroes. Everyone talks about it, like Grant Morrison, Alan Moore. Superhero cape shit is basically like Hercules and Gilgamesh and Cuchulainn and all of it. It's just I guess the heroes now reflect different cultural values of the time compared to the ones back then. And it's like now we want to see the ideal guy have a happy ending, whereas back then a lot of the time, especially Greek heroes, they have tragic, horrible lives. You watch them do some epic quest only for them to fail at the end in the most horrible way. So I guess different stuff appeals to different times, but otherwise I see it as exactly the same thing.
Now here's the thing: is there used to be, even up until probably the 1980s, it was not uncommon for action stories. Well, I mean, Unforgiven, right? Super tragic ending. But when's the last time you saw a movie that wasn't a noir-esque film have a tragic ending? Why are we Americans so afraid of tragedy?
Well, tragedy. These stories were as dark as they were, at least I believe, because they were cautionary tales in a lot of ways. Like, the boy who cried wolf gets eaten up, so don't lie. And sometimes you have to fight your way through the darkness in order to reach the light, like in the movie Return to Oz. It's like children's stories used to be extremely dark for that reason, because they were, like we said earlier in the conversation, they were practice for adulthood. They were like teaching little lions to chase zebra without without actually having them chase zebra, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say that is a good point. I will say we still do have tragedies though, especially like my girlfriend watches a bunch of these movies where it's like the tragic ending and the person dies in the end after they have like the happy life. And I've seen a bunch of them throughout my life, like those rom-coms. Those are one of the most popular types of stories nowadays, for sure. Like, like they both have cancer, and then you see them and you're like, oh, they're gonna make it, and then at the end they die. And that's the whole point of it. It seems like every year at least one of those comes out. So people still like the tragedies, but I guess not in their magic heroes.
That's interesting. You even think about like Terminator 2 did not have the happy ending.
Yeah.
It had a bittersweet ending. Like, yes, the Terminator sacrificed himself to give his, I guess you could call him a surrogate son, a future, and that's what fathers were always supposed to do, is that you plant the tree under which the shade you'll never sit. If that means you work yourself in a dangerous job and potentially risk your life so that your family can live, then that's just what men did. And,
True.
Yeah.
Matt, you were going to say something? Crotts.
Well, I was just thinking, our superhero stories are more Celtic than Greek, I guess, which is kind of surprising. Again, we always point back to Greece and Rome, but I think we do have more in common. I mean, our cultures, our ancestors are all, into, and I think our ancestral, mythological traditions, I think probably survived a lot longer than the nations did, and in the form of these, what were fairy tales and children's stories, and folk
Well, I think part of that.
tale type things. So
I think in terms
I think
of
those things kind of preserved for right up until the 19th century. So
I was going to say, I think in terms of hero stories, I think a lot of that comes down to like the market that they're for in a lot of ways, because most of our hero stories were children's stories, right? It's not exclusively to that, but I think that's part of it. And so I think it owes a lot to King Arthur, right? And Arthur had a tragic end, but he had a really great middle, right? And so Bruce Wayne, which is very much, that Batman archetype, he's founded in tragedy, but he's very much that Camelot model. He's the Lord of the Realm who's protecting the little guy kind of thing, right? And so, of course he can do everything because we see the middle of his journey. That's the whole point. We haven't gotten to Mordred yet. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll find a way around it because, we're Americans. And actually, Nebel mentions a great thing. I pinned the thing here. Maybe there's something to be said about having a broad repertoire of learning how to fail. There's also kind of desire for learning how to succeed in American culture. And we love Annie, right? We love that rags to riches story. That's a big part of our being. And actually, this is an interesting idea too. Star Storyteller brings up the Welsh coal mines and the idea of how green was my valley, right? That you can work your way out from the bottom. That you can even if you have to leave home, that you can find something better. That sometimes the past gets to stay in the past, and that idea of that eternal optimism. So I think that those are definitely aspects in that. But you look at Superman, right? Possibly the most quintessential American hero. And Superman is just about success, right? Everything about Superman is about success. He comes from the country. He makes it in the city. He gets the girl. He's everything. He's the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
Oh, well. We'll have to have a whole Arthur show, Star, because I think the canon, there's a different canon in play. Don't listen to the French stuff. That'll mess you up. but yeah. So I think that's with Superman definitely falls into that all winning all the time kind of a thing. But I do think that we do have of definite in America lack of tragedy on that. Matt, can you hear us? Matt Trinh, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Okay. So we've said a lot because you're having mic problems and everything. What are your thoughts on any of the things we've talked about?
Well, I think
I'll just put you on the spot.
Well, I think a lot of the earlier stories, the reason why they were so popular is because they had some element of truth to them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Definitely.
So when it comes to your storytelling, the stories you're working on, right? Whether it be McKinney Chronicles, whether it be Mythics, what is your take on tragedy? Is that something that you actively want to incorporate, or is it something that you're just kind of, see where it goes from there?
Oh, I see what you're doing. You're trying to get me to give you guys spoilers.
Thematic spoilers.
Well, let's just say that Althea will have a tragedy happen in her life sooner rather than later.
Okay. Ooh,
but
that's ominous.
Sometimes tragedies are vehicles for growth.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to overcome them, or be consumed by them.
It's true.
Yeah. I know with Forces, we're working on an incredibly long redemption arc. That's part of the big story we're telling with that. So, but there's lots of jokes along the way. But it's a really, really long redemption arc. As a webcomic, we've been putting it online since 2005 or 6.
Wow.
So
Mhm.
there you have it. We're still working toward it, but
Well, you know, the webcomics are deceptive in their length. Sometimes it feels longer, and then when you put it to print, it's actually shorter than you thought it was.
yeah, definitely. So, Brett, we've talked a lot about these, like, ideas about how mythology shapes things, how heroes fit into things. Of the different characters in play, I think yours, and I don't mean this to be insulting, but it's the less hero-y of the stories that we've talked about. I'm not that there aren't struggles, not that there aren't battles to be fought within the world of the Changeling, but it's less straightforward in a lot of ways. At least what I've read so far, and of course I don't know where everything is going, but where does that? How do you feel those ideas relate to Changeling, or do they?
I'm not really sure to answer that because you're not wrong. It's definitely the least heroic. It's kind of setting itself up, at least from the outset, to be a more straightforward or a coming of age story. So it's less about heroism and more about self-discovery. Not that those two can't go hand in hand. It's just not the kind of book it turned out to. It's like, I've said this a lot. I honestly don't feel like I'm really writing the stories so much as just taking dictation for things that already happened. Like, just it's like it's the best way I can put it. It probably doesn't sound like it makes a ton of sense, but it really doesn't. I don't feel like I'm really steering the narrative, so to speak. I feel like I'm just I'm just kind of along for the ride.
No, I think that's a really common writer's situation. I think the whole idea, speaking about Greece, right? Going back to the Graces, going back to the Muses, right? The idea that there's something beyond the creative realm that pushes us toward creativity. That's a long running thing. I think too. I know with Forces, we have a character. We originally, Chris and I, were just doing basically as a gag comic. And then as we got to know our characters more and we fleshed them out more in the story, they started taking on kind of a life of their own, and definitely like directing things a little more and pushing things in different directions than I think than either of us had intended. But that just, there's still an organic outgrowth of a lot of that stuff. So I definitely, I've seen that personally happen, where you feel carried along by the inspiration. So.
Could Changeling be a more heroic story? Yeah, it could be, but it also would be a very different one too. And I think it'd have a very different identity. It just would not be the same one. I think the fact that it sort of skews a lot of those. I didn't even set to do this on purpose, but I think the fact it skews a lot of heroic conventions sort of helps set itself apart. But it's not being done in a way that's supposed to be deconstructive or constructive or anything. It's more being done out of this just feels like right for the narrative, at least to me. So it's like, it's kind of, the story isn't about Maeve learning to be a hero. It's kind of more about her learning about the sort of person she wants to be.
Well, it's about, and it's a lot of it seems to be about Maeve learning who Maeve is.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, even if you wanted to tell a hero story, like long term, right? This first arc or series of arcs, she's discovering who she is in a really tangible way, because, you know, she has this opinion, this idea about what life is for her as, you know, as a kid, as a, you know, in school and with her own, you know, personal struggles. And then she finds out not only, you know, she's not only adopted, she's not human. And how does that drastically change a person's perspective on the world, right? And I think it's one of those things that, like, I mean, I think everybody has struggled with feeling that they don't belong, right? But feeling like you don't belong on Earth is a different, you know, way of looking at it, certainly. But also, like, you know, you don't belong in your little town. You don't belong, you know, you don't have things in common with your cousins. You know, that's normal stuff. You know, not belonging on the planet, that's a whole different situation, you know.
Yeah, to that point, if I can just jump in real quick, there's a line that Brett put in issue 1 that's probably the most powerful line in the book. You know, Maeve is Christian, you know, she goes to church and she believes in God and all that, but she has her doubts and she isn't quite sure why yet. And when her transformation becomes apparent and she learns her real identity, she's weeping and saying, why would God do this to one of his children? And what's the line, Brett?
Shoot.
He says,
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I wanted you to say it, but if it's not on the tip of your tongue, I'll go ahead and the Fae who is there with her says, because you're not his child. And it was just, wow. There's a sucker punch for you.
Right. I mean, it's a whole worldview thing.
Yeah.
And that's and that whole question about, you know, the idea of, the whole idea of being, of defining your humanhood, your personhood, is such a, I mean, it really is an important aspect of our being in the real world. I mean, we really have to come up with a shape or a story for who we are. And I think that's one of the things that reflects back to my concept of the heroism of the mundane. That it is a struggle, even though we don't have to, you know, you're never going to wake up one day and like, you know, and find out that, you know, Poseidon was your dad. You might find out that your dad, you know, who was the kindest person to you in the world, was a real son of a bitch in his 20s. And how do you square that circle? You know, that whole kind of thing. So I think that there's a lot of metaphor wrapped into a story like Maeve's about being and about doing. Star in the chat points out also Changeling has a ton of shoujo conventions, as well as a particularly magical girl. A lot of it has to do with puberty and becoming a woman. How girls discover that they become a woman. That's powerful stuff. Which is not something that I relate to at all, because I've never become a woman, but I do know that it happens. I've been told.
I can't wait. I have a 9-year-old daughter, so anytime now.
I do have sons, and it is something. It is an amazing thing to watch them having been little boys and becoming men. But it's also very, for boys, it's gradual. There's no suddenness to it until they become, at least from my own experience, until you become a father, and then everything changes real damn fast.
Like flipping the switch. Yeah.
Everything before that is just this gradual, like, you know, putting off of the childhood, and
you know that song "Closing Time."
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Fun fact: the guy who wrote it, when he wrote that song, he was about to be a father, so he wrote it to close out one phase of his life and begin another.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, and I think that's really it. But I think everything for me, especially. I mean, so everything before I was even becoming a husband was more of a gradual shift of leaving the childish things behind, and then, but man, when that kid showed up, I thought I knew what was going on, the whole pregnancy and everything, and I thought I was prepared. But when they let us walk out of the hospital with that baby, like, I was not ready.
Well, you get ready really fast. I mean,
Man, yeah.
I always tell like any fellow man that that will listen, if you want to increase your productivity, just become a dad. You'll by necessity become more productive.
So, what I was laughing at here was Twitless has arrived and said, "You guys know that you can become a woman anytime, right? It's current year. You just
have to express that you are, and that's it.
You just declare it." So yeah. Neo says that Maeve's story does speak to me in a sense. I imagine having your entire world turn on its head, learning a lot of things you once knew were either a lie or abruptly changed. And I think that there are a lot of people who have gone through some of things like that too, in terms of in a lot of ways. But
I think that's something everyone can relate to. It's like once, like that, either during your teenage years or maybe in your early 20s, you just get out in the real world and you find out, hey, maybe my parents didn't know everything, and so now I have to figure things out on my own.
Yeah, and I think that also it's important to have in that kind of thing to have the humility to say even some things that I knew, maybe they're not so. I know that when my parents did a really good job of not just selling me ideas, about really making me prove my thoughts, right? And so when I got out on the own, I knew what I thought. It wasn't just what my parents thought. We didn't always agree on stuff, but I knew what I thought. But I still had to run into coworkers and other people, and are my ideas still correct? Just because they're my ideas, just because I own them, just because I didn't inherit these ideas, does that mean they're right or wrong, or both? So, and that's definitely something that we all, I think. Matt Crotts.
Sorry, I really hate. For some reason, it must be my internet because I'm the only one who's lagging. So apologies. But just going back to that, how guys mature more gradually. I did hear a theory once that a lot of these male-centered myth stories are means of compensating for this unclear passage from boyhood to manhood, where it's clear for women, it's less clear for men, and so there needs to be some sort of cultural collective way of addressing that, and almost including with like some sort of ceremonial passage for the boy to realize that he really has crossed that threshold in a way that's more it's just an easier challenge to I don't know. I wouldn't know.
No, that's an interesting.
But it's a different kind of challenge for women, and then it's really apparent, but it's less so for men. So you need to address that as a community with stories. Anyway, what do you guys think of that?
It makes sense to me. Not something I really stopped to think about, because there's a lot of fairy stories that are still about girls, and there are whole ideas about the feminine within literature that I think are important too. But I do think that there is definitely some weight to the idea. I think also if you look at the idea of how the roles of men are different in many societies just because of the aspect of strength, right? I mean, our word husband, right? It means caretaker, right? It doesn't just mean dude. Right? So wrapped within our language is the idea that a part of a man's job is to take care of the wife, is to take care of the home, is to take care of the children, is to provide for them in the same way you'd provide for, you know, something else, you know, and I think that takes a certain level of education, that of a, like a mission statement kind of a way. And I think a lot of, and so that's part of my belief, is a lot of hero stories are ways of teaching that mission statement. Yeah, like animal husbandry, except family husbandry. Even in the chat says, and I that's exactly, I think that in English our language is tied into that. Now, I have not looked up the word husband in other languages to know if that's something that's encoded in other languages too or not. So I'm only speaking about the English language context there. So who knows? I'm a monoglot. So there you have it. Star in the chat says, like the Iron John book, the reason males are having such difficulty is because they don't have rites of passage. I don't think it's just the rites of passage. I think that's part of it. But I think it's also the lack, not just of a rite of passage, but the whole lack of purpose, right? Western society has, in a lot of ways, like just extricated the concept of manhood from family, right? And eliminated the idea of not masculinity, but of like father roles, and I think that's a big part of it. And actually, Nebel says the same thing I just said. The role of men isn't set in stone or clear. It's hardly ever clear in the animal kingdom, and that's also true. But especially in, I think, our modern society, we just don't have that same kind of governance role that we had even 50 years ago, and it was already being chipped away 50 years ago. But from what we had seen, and I mean, of course, I think, you know, I'm not saying people had it right in terms of practice, but I think there was more of, you know, the expectation of what fatherhood, what husbandness was supposed to mean before the modern era, even if people didn't do it. So, but there you go. That's part of my take on it. Anybody else have ideas about the heroic paradigm in literature relating to manhood?
Definitely, I would definitely say those are those are stories that we could definitely use in this day and age. Like, there's a little, I got lucky because my dad was a pretty good role model for maleness. But there's a lot of guys my age who either came from fatherless homes or just did not have good role models when I was growing up. So you kind of need stories like that to help inspire them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I even think that, like, you know, my in my life, my folks split up, right? After I was grown, but like growing up, my dad was a great example of what a guy ought to be, right? Mm-hmm. That was something that, like, I felt also very lucky about, knowing what that ought to be. And well, it looks like Matt Crotts got kicked, man. So anyway, I was on to share, speaking about you know, the idea about manhood and stories. Wanted to share something that I have in the
yeah, it it kind of reminds me a little bit of this one one Gavin McInnes clip I saw years ago where he was talking about like how dads went from being, what's his name? The dad on Leave It to Beaver. I don't remember his name. They went from
Ward
that
Cleaver.
guy. They went to that guy to Homer Simpson.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, here's part of the thing that is even within that, right? Homer Simpson was an idiot, but he tried.
Oh yeah. Early on, like you could
Yeah.
whatever faults Homer had, one thing you could not take away from him was that he did love his family and he was trying his best.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I think we're in a lot of ways that we don't even have the idea that, I mean, not everybody can be Ward Cleaver, but at least you can show up. And we have whole, films, I mean, aspects in fiction where, dad doesn't even show up, where he's a non-issue, right? And I think that's a bigger thing for me. But anyway, the little thing I posted here, this is from the last page of my Joe Jobs comic. And looks like Matt Trinh dropped out again, unfortunately. But yeah, this is our Chad from Forces of Good and Evil, a sneak peek at him in the future, surrounded by some of the other characters. But but fatherhood is definitely a theme in our universe that I want to address. Although Joe Jobs is not about Chad, it's about Greg, about growing up, about working crappy jobs after you're already grown. But there's a little bit there. So, but yeah, there you have it.
Very cool.
Very cool. But yeah.
Hey, how's my no, there's a pause. Is my audio am I 10 seconds behind you guys?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. It was my camera. 2 hours. I'm sorry, guys.
That's fine.
Screwed it up.
It's only been an hour and a half. We started late.
Very fair.
So is Florida internet just terrible?
I don't seem to be having any issue, and I'm in Florida.
It must be the camera.
I think it's more my I mean if you're in the sort of Florida homes that are concrete blocks, you've got to have the Wi-Fi situated pretty well where your computer pretty near the Wi-Fi. It's solid rock. You have to project your Wi-Fi through, unlike a lot of other homes. So, and my Wi-Fi is in 2 rooms over, so that's probably what was going on.
So I've actually,
but yeah, I mean, like even the Homer situation is it's interesting that I don't know if they would do that even today. I think even by the early, like of course, like first they're trying to make a character, and then that's my understanding of the lore of the Homer is kind of the main character. But in order to do that, but they still wanted him to be, I mean, you can't have a comedy show where the dad is anything other than the stupidest in the show, and that was prevalent in the 90s.
Well, it was very prevalent in the 90s, but I think also a lot of that stems from what and I'm going to forget the dude's name, Neil Simon tried doing with All in the Family, right? So I get it, All in the Family speech in, which is not related to mythology necessarily, but bear with me because I absolutely love All in the Family. In All in the Family, I believe it was Neil Simon, tried making fun of his father. Archie Bunker was the dude's dad, really, right? And the whole concept was that he wanted to show how out of touch his dad was, and how he'd be a good progressive and all that kind of stuff. But if you watch the whole show and the sequel shows, Archie Bunker's the hero, right? Meathead bails on his wife. Gloria ends up just being a wreck of a person. Archie in Archie's place, the after I can't remember the gal's name. The gal who played Edith didn't want to come back, and Carol O'Connor still wanted a job, so they had a spin-off show called Archie's Place where he buys the local bar, and Archie ends up adopting an orphan Jewish kid, and being the surrogate father again, right? And so Archie's the hero. He becomes, he learns that he was being intolerant, and he is loving. He escalates people around him. He's constantly supporting his daughter, even though she's making bad decisions. He was 100% right about Michael Stivic, and being a worthless layabout who would spell doom for his daughter. All of this stuff. He's the hero, but he's always poked fun at. And I think that set up this paradigm for poking fun at dads within pop culture, because it was wildly successful. And I think a lot of people in Hollywood missed the scene that Archie's really the hero, because he's right. Not about everything, and there's always room to grow and be better, but he was right.
Yeah, and that was the running theme. I mean, almost at the end of every episode, Archie would have to reassess his views on something and say, hey, I got to give this some thought, And like he was, like you said, a living, growing, learning human being. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so likable.
Yep. So anyway, it does speak to the cultural context of fiction in some ways. But it has gone off of traditional folklore and legend. But anyway, man, I'm kind of out of thinking, honestly, at the minute. But
someone brought up how most superhero stories seem to be inspired by Celtic myth, and I'm surprised no one brought up Norse.
Yeah, well, and I think
well, Norse gods were essentially superheroes because they were basically
that
flawed
Thor has
human
his own
beings.
comic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But Thor comics aren't necessarily like that 100% true to Norse legend either.
Yeah, well, first of all, Thor was a redhead, not a blonde. That's one thing. That's number one. Number two,
and I think the Thor comic has some really great like internal mythology, and that is totally left out of current tellings, like at all. And I think even like, because in his mortal form as Don Blake, he's crippled, right? And his cane, right, that he depends on to walk, transforms into the hammer when he becomes Thor. And so his whole thing is a parable for pride. And so his weakness is his strength. And when he's able to accept humility, that's when he's able to be strong. And so I think that's one of the things that's a great, but that's part of Marvel's Thor. That's not part of of like Norse Thor. So that's actually a foreign concept in Norse mythology.
Yeah. Thor was not the smartest of the gods, and he was definitely the strongest. But Loki ran circles around him. And interestingly enough, in Norse mythology, like most of the events that took place were as a direct result of Loki just being a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, the end of the world, it takes place because Loki was a jerk. So.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Thor got his hammer because Loki shaved his wife's hair, and it kind of snowballed from there. I
haven't read that.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically what happens is Loki thought it would be funny to shave Sif's hair. And Thor's like, I'm going to break every bone in your body unless you get her hair back. So he says, okay, let me go over to the dwarves here and trick them into making new hair for her by creating this like competition to see who can make the best artifact for the gods. And so we got her hair back, but that's how apparently Mjolnir was crafted. So there you go.
There you have it.
Yeah.
That's fun. Yeah. So
I just remember in college I was told the story about didn't he become trans at some point?
Oh, Loki? Yes.
He
No,
woman.
he turned himself into a...
He wasn't trans. He wasn't trans. He was a cross dresser.
Oh, yeah. Well, Thor had to dress up, in order to get his hammer back because the giant stole it.
No, but Loki had turned himself into a she-wolf to trick Thor at one point, and he ends up getting pregnant. And I'm gonna forget the name of the wolf. There's the wolf that swallows the sun. Is Loki's? Yeah. So that's part of it.
Oh wow!
And that's actually
that's even weirder.
I really I really don't want to get into the nature of sexuality from Norse legend. That's a whole
like because another one of Loki's children was the world serpent.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is like okay, because he had a lot of fun with a lot of giants apparently.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah, Fenrir. That's the one. That's the thing there. So everybody can see there. Because okay.
Oh.
But anyway,
I'll be Googling that.
It is 10 till, and everybody here makes things. So let's go around and shill our projects. So here's the ticket. The description down below doesn't have any links in it at all. It doesn't even have a good title because that's the way it is right now. So I'll fix it. But right now, we'll have to get it out there. But Matt Trinh, Mythics 2 just was mailed out. Oh, hang on a second. Is that available for purchase anywhere?
It is available on the Mythoverse store for purchase. We just put up just last week when all the fulfillment was completed.
And is that available in digital and physical?
Correct. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and it's at mythomerch.com/collections/comics. And you can see all of our comics there. And all the number 1s are there. And like Matt said, we just added number 2 in digital and in print. So I'm just making sure everyone from the campaign got their stuff before we put it up there.
And since we're talking about the Mythoverse, Dan, Adobe Kroger 2 is getting ready to go out. I mean, the campaign to launch sometime soon, right?
That's right. The only reason I've not yet launched it because the book is complete. It's ready to go. And I have a print proof right here. So when that campaign launches, it'll be hopefully, knock on wood, a very rapid fulfillment for everybody. But the reason I'm holding off is I wanted to make sure that Mythics number 2 was fully fulfilled, and that's been accomplished. And also our Hallowed Harvest anthology, which I just checked on the status, and it's in a status printed, preparing to ship. So as soon as that starts arriving, then I will start hyping up Adobe Kroger. I just don't want to open up a new campaign when we still have one outstanding.
Believe me.
But yeah, that is, yeah. But yes, that Adobe Kroger number 2 is next on our docket. And on top of all that, we have a lot of really fun short one-shot comics over on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/mythoversecomics. And for $5 a month, you get all of our digitals, including all the shorts. And there's a lot. So a lot of good stuff coming up.
And is it later this year we're looking at Changeling 2, Brett, or do we have a time on that yet?
Okay. off the top of my head. We are going to be going as soon as Adobe Kroger number 2 wraps up fulfillment, so that will be later sometime this year. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Ginger and Victor are currently working on their side. Like, all the art has been 100% paid for. It's just now in their hands to get it done. Victor's working on 2 pages right now. Ginger's working on some concept art as well as doing the coloring. So it's just they're firing away. And I think when I last talked to Ginger, she told me she had about 8 or 9 pages already. And this is out of, I believe, a 28-page book. Let me double check that just to be sure. No. Okay, here we go. No. Finish loading you. Oh boy. Google Docs is being slow right now. I apologize.
Fair enough. I will. While we're waiting, I got to say, deSosa, your camera keeps trying to autofocus, and it's it's making the whole thing throb.
26. Right now, she's got about 8 or 9 pages to color right now out of 26.
So, well, cool. I look forward to that one. I'm excited to see where that story's going for sure. Since we're talking about it there, Dan deSosa, those of course are 2 collections of Oi. Are those available for purchase?
Yeah, I think I got them on. Let me talk close to the microphone. Hold on. Okay. I think I got them on Etsy, but also I have an Indiegogo campaign that's currently on the thing when it finished, but you could still get it. So you could get. It's for the 4th book. It's called Oi, the Banshee Vale Horror Show. It's the continuation of book 3, Banshee Vale Calling, but the whole thing is on Webtoons and Tapas, so you could read it for free if you only want 1 book, or if you don't want to get them all and you just want to read the story. I also have volume 1. I actually printed this, I think, in 2014. I did a Kickstarter, so the art is a little bit sloppier and different style than these ones, but the writing's still good. And it's like 5 chapters, 136 pages that introduces the main characters. And then, yeah, the story, it's a fun fantasy about a bard in ancient Ireland gets sent to a town that never heard music before. It's kind of like fun slice of life. I'm inspired a lot by Love and Rockets comics and shonen manga. I just want to tell like good, sincere stories with good characters that aren't like just dated and referencing pop culture. And yeah, I just want to tell a nice story with it. So,
And one of the things I love about it too, one of the things I love about Oi, is that you use a blue color in the finished art for the inks, and it gives it just this great contrast to the way the art's just, and I think it just really pops. And it also has your style has very much of a punk comic kind of feel to it, and I just love that. So I definitely encourage people to check it out on Webtoons or Tapas. I put the Webtoons in the chat earlier, and it's a lot of fun. I really like it. So
yeah, I did it blue like that because the Celts painted themselves up with like a blue colored ink. So I thought it would be cool to do the whole book in blue. But these newer ones, I print them in black and white.
Okay.
So yeah, I got Oi Volume 1, Oi Solstice Book 2, Banshee Vale Calling Book 3, and then you could get the fourth one all in like some value deal. I think it's like $80. It's kind of like a cool fantasy horror with like fun characters. This arc kind of is about the town hurling captain mainly, who's kind of like a town hero, and what heroism means to different people, and how like stories and gossip and folklore spreads around. So yeah, check it out. Oi, Tales of Bardic Fury. And thanks for having me on the show, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah, man. I love having you on. It's great, and I love and drawing while we were talking was cool too. So,
cool.
And the last person to talk so far, Matt Crotts. You are getting ready to do something different and new, huh?
Yeah. So Kyrie is turning into a Kyrie, and it's just kind of letting me. I said at the beginning, I'm just kind of going wider in scope, where I'm exploring different cultures from the setting of the heroes of Kyrie, but then I'm going like deeper through time. So I can go up. I've got a story mythology this year, and I've got 4 stories, maybe 5. Oh, am I okay? And we've got 19th century, 20th century stories. We've got and a couple more in between, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm excited to be doing that, and also I got some collaboration stuff coming out. Something with Narwhal is coming. It's probably going to be ramping up by the end, and then I've got something with John Delarose coming out probably in a couple weeks. So that's fun. Yeah.
Very cool.
Good things
Very
for
cool.
2021.
Which is exciting. And of course, my webcomic, Forces of Good and Evil, is out there, available. We're updating the archives in color on Webtoons. You can. We also have a store at idealcomics.net people can check out. And we're working on some of the stuff. And we've got a Patreon if you want to check that out. But where we're making stuff. I'm working on some other projects in the background. And this year, hopefully, we should get our mystery story expositioner tale done. Solo Voce is the name of it. But Barry's working on redoing the art from the beginning. Yeah, I need to crack the whip on him, but he's not here right now when my whip's in the shop. So, but also for anybody who watches who backed, if you get sick of waiting and want your money back, always, we haven't spent any of it yet. So, because that's how the thing is. Anyway, yeah, that's the story. Also, you can check me out on Minds at MD Rhys, and I'm starting things over there. So that's the story. That's the show. Next week,
Nice.
I have forgotten his first name, but the dude who wrote The Flock is going to be on. We're going to be talking about his comic, which is going to be starting a crowdfund in February. And Twitless is going to be our second chair next week. So he won't be here just to sabotage things in the chat. He'll be here to sabotage things in person. So,
Nice,
that's what we're doing next week. And I don't know the week after. Who knows? Well, who knows what crazy thing I'll come up with in the next fortnight. For now, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope that you all had fun. I know I did. And keep out there loving comics, and we'll catch you guys around.